going on. So we've got to bring the mic to a place where we can hear it, right? It's going to be an exciting week, guys. We've got a great way to kick it off. We're going to drop into a quick chat we had with our friend Brent Persons here on the weekend and give his channel a little boost, guys. This is Brent Persons. His link should be in the description below. Let's check out what Brent was saying. So yeah, what's going on this weekend, Brent, man? It's good to see you. You're one of my favorite members of the channel. What is it that makes you so curious about Canadian politics these days?
It's looking at the on the state side, following them for a bit. They're very well. No one's really following the Canadian too much. So what the hell? Might as well just check it out, and then been following ever since.
Bring it a little closer to home. My dad used to always say, like, Ehren, don't be concerned with American politics. It has nothing to do with you. Like, be concerned about federal, municipal, and provincial politics, like in your country. Those are some things that you have a little say in. At least we get a vote.
Yeah.
So, Brent, why don't you tell us a little tiny bit about your channel? Because that's pretty much what we're trying to do here is promote your channel and try to get you some new viewers.
There's the shared content and created content. A little bit of everything.
Yep.
There's the Canadian politics, a little bit of nature, outdoors stuff. I was thinking maybe a little bit of comedy or something, a little something, you know.
I've seen some of your videos, man. I've seen some of your videos. They're pretty funny. Like, I try to check every one. Yeah, your stuff is great. So there is comedy, there is nature, and there is politics, and there's a whole bunch of Brent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the politics. I kind of threw a little bit of comedy in there if I could.
Well, I try to do the same thing.
A serious side, it was a little bit of comedy.
Yeah. I try to do the same thing. Like with a little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah, that's it. I just find it's great that we have this little community we're building. And do you like it when you see videos of other people from the channel?
Yeah, there's quite a few good ones.
We're going to be trying to do more of these videos to get to meet the members and the people that are watching out there. And if they have something to promote, like your YouTube page, which is, where can people find that, Brent?
What was that again?
Where can people find your YouTube channel?
It's Brent Parsons.
Brent Persons. Just put in Brent Persons into YouTube, and it'll come up.
Yeah.
All right. I'll include a link in tomorrow's.
Yeah, just type in my name, it'll show up.
Okay, cool. I'll include a link in the description of the live video that we're doing on Monday.
Yeah, all right.
All right, cool, man. Are you working tomorrow, or might you be there for the show?
Tomorrow I'm off. Tuesday I'm working at 11 in the morning.
Okay, well, so hopefully you'll be able to see this run live tomorrow. I'm going to open with it.
All right.
That's where we're going to start the show off, is a little promotion of Brent Persons. And all right, gang, so that's Brent from our group. He's a super great guy. He has a pretty fun channel. Check his stuff out. It's worth a watch. Definitely is. Subscribe to his channel if you're ever there. And now
I think our leader,
into the next piece. It's pretty interesting fun.
Trudeau. I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word.
It's a crazy time in Canada, right? As we learn about these Canadian federal politics right here on Question Period Canada. My name's Ehren. Let's get into this crazy video, man. It doesn't slow down in Canadian federal politics. Let's take a peek.
Let's talk about the devil in the details, because the angel lurking over all of this is fundamentally we're protecting children from being exploited online. Okay, so while there are children and they are exploited online and they deserve protection, so that's all and good. What steps are taken in the bill to actually protect children who are being exploited online?
Right.
And then how do we segue from that to hate? Like, because those aren't the same universe.
There's, as I say, there are three bits in the bill, and they're in the same bill, but they're distinct. So there's the human rights aspect, there's the criminal code aspect, and then this third aspect, which is primarily one that's aimed at the protecting kids, is an administrative regime that gives an agency the power essentially to supervise the online platforms. But it also gives them the power to make the rules. So we don't even know what the rules are going to be. Basically, it just gives the whole control of the thing to a government agency, to the bureaucrats, to do as they think best.
Right,
in the
so
name
they're
of
establishing an entirely new bureaucracy.
Exactly, yes.
With an unspecified range of power, with a non-specific purview that purports to protect children from online exploitation, but has the possibility of turning into a policing state for the internet per se.
And this is often how the administrative state works, right? So this agency will not be policing citizens themselves directly, but they'll be policing the online platforms, and the platforms will thereby censor the people who are using them. So it's a we're not doing it, we're hands off, we're two steps removed situation, but in effect, it is the government pulling the strings of the.
Okay, so to what degree do you think that even the setup of that new administrative bureaucracy, which has very extensive powers and very poorly defined powers, as far as I could tell when I read the bill,
yes,
how much of that do you think is actually devoted genuinely? I know this is a judgment call, obviously, but you have to infer that from the legislation.
right.
If the legislation was honest and well written, it would very specifically target the target of its purported reason for existence.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
If it was designed, for example, to produce a more general regime for online policing, to me, that's what it looks like. And if so, is that a consequence of poor legislative design? Is it a consequence of intent? Like, what do you think's going on there?
Well, what's going on there is what's been going on inside our law with respect to empowering the administrative state for a long, long time, right? So standard legislation now, at either the federal or provincial level, is authorizing legislation, meaning you pass a bill about a certain subject, and it might contain some rules in it, but it also contains the authority, the delegation of authority to the bureaucrats, to an agency of some kind, to the minister, or to whoever, to a Human Rights Commission, to make policies or guidelines or regulations about certain things. And you can't tell by reading the statute what the rules are. Right. And so you've transferred legislative authority essentially from the legislature to the bureaucracy. And this is not the bureaucracy stealing it. This is the legislature giving it. Because they don't want the responsibility of doing it, and they don't want to have to go through the minutiae of figuring out what the right rules are. So they just shove it off into the back rooms, and this is the way the administrative state works. Now, it's if I can say, it's a kind of collusion between the legislature and the courts. So the courts, okay, we have these three branches of government. Yes, we have the legislature, we have the courts, and we have the administrative state. And, the division between them is cleanest in the American version of things. But in Canada and the UK, we have them as well. And the legislature and the courts are together supposed to be supervising what the executive branch, the administrative state, is doing. Because the general rule is supposed to be the administration, which used to be the king after all, can't do anything that's not authorized by the legislature. Okay? So these three things are checks and balances on each other.
Yeah.
But now they're all on the same page. And the courts and the legislature are convinced about the need for this expansive, overwhelming administrative state. And so instead of supervising the administrative branch and the courts, instead of making sure that they stick within their powers, the legislature's delegating to it and the courts are deferring to it. And so what we end up with—
And the legislators don't have to take responsibility.
Exactly.
In either way.
Because we can't find who's responsible anymore.
Yeah.
Right. It's all sort of a mystery. It's a moving ball. And this is the way administrative agencies and government departments and ministries can be, quote, agile. They want to be agile. They want to be able to respond to societal problems quickly. Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you're able to respond quickly, that means you have the legislative power in your hands.
Yeah.
And that nobody else knows exactly what's going on until it happens. And sometimes not until after the fact, even, right? So that principle of the rule of law that said the rule applies to everybody, both the ruled and the ruler. If you have an agile government making rules up as they go along, well, that means by definition, the rules can't apply to them because they have the power to change them whenever they want to. And so we have agile governments who are managing us, managing society, solving social problems. We are in a managerial era in the law. Management, I would put it this way. Management, the ethos of managerialism has supplanted the rule of law as the basic idea. Instead of the rule of law, we have rule by law now, which means that the law is nothing more than a tool for the government to use to create on a whim, whenever they need it to make you do this. And there was no better example of all of this than during COVID. You had people standing behind microphones on a Tuesday afternoon saying, well, the rule tomorrow is going to be this. That's agile government. It means the legislature is not taking on its role of making the rules, and the executive branch has taken over making the rules, applying the rules, and enforcing the rules, all on its own. And that is not the way the Western legal system used to work. We have managerialism instead of the rule of law.
So yes, come and join the gang. I'm Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. We do wonder about a lot of things here. We have a fun community where we watch the live question periods daily. That's a great time. Come and check out one of the live shows. We make all these other videos. I'm just gonna So guys, we're gonna drop into question period now. Like, there's a couple of minutes of statements left, but we're gonna drop into that because it's time, getting very close. Anticipating Monday. Should be a pretty fun day, I think. Again, there's a couple of minutes left in their statements. I wanted to show those videos. I thought they were fun. Before we get kicked off with that, though, I would like to say hi to everybody in the room. I'm going to try to cover everybody in one fell swoop. Hey, Janet. Hey, Patty. What's up? Sheila Hall, always a pleasure. You're the best. Kirk, my man. Joan, what's going on? Two Flips, I saw you kicking around here. I think I saw Cal Maru today. What's going on, brother? Boomer Media, always a pleasure. When you're in the house, it's better when you're here. Red Rose, good afternoon. What's going on? NK Do, what's up? How are you today? It should be a pretty exciting show, guys, I think. Alcoholic, welcome to the group. We're working on other things, trying to solve like Canadian federal politics here, but glad that you joined us. You've got a sharp eye, there's no doubt. Donna Logan, good afternoon. Lisa Hudson, good day. What's up? Thank you for hanging out with us so often. It's a lot of fun. My goodness, guys, there's so many people. It's amazing. It blows me away. Joan, I certainly hope I caught you because you're top shelf. And there's just so many. Dive Crew Canada, my man. How would I ever leave you out? There are just so many people dropping in. Pickles, what's up? Sorry, bro. You're the top of the pile, often gets overlooked. And Louise Lebon, what's up? Good day. Welcome to the chat. Good to see you. Yeah, so we are getting pretty close to when the show is going to kick off. So we're going to drop back in there. Guerrilla Radio, what's going on? Howdy. Welcome to the chat. Thank you for coming back. We're going to drop into the question period now.
All too often holding the system together. We see them tirelessly working with the sick, the elderly, and the most vulnerable members of our society. Sometimes in remote areas, they are the only people who can assess people's state of health and provide the necessary care. It's a demanding role, requiring vigilance, commitment, excellence, and humanity. Thank you for being there for us day after day so that we have access to quality care. You're changing our lives and shaping tomorrow. Happy
Thanks, Mike.
Nursing Week.
Amazing.
The honourable member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Medicina.
Mr. Speaker, the Oxford Learning Dictionary defines the word wacko as crazy, not sensible. And to many in British Columbia, what is happening in our beaches, in our neighborhoods and parks, on our playgrounds, in coffee shops, and even in our hospitals is truly wacko. Because this Prime Minister and NDP Premier David Eby have surrendered our most precious public spaces to illegal drug dealers. This is a wacko policy. These illegal drug dealers prey on our most vulnerable in society. This is not good for those suffering with addictions, nor is it good for public safety. In fact, even the BC NDP have now figured this out. Since the BC government asked 10 days ago to stop this wacko far-left legalization of hard drugs project, some 60 British Columbians have died due to the Prime Minister's political dithering. Mr. Speaker, let's end this wacko, failed, deadly, illegal drug experiment in British Columbia, and let's bring common-sense conservative solutions that will protect the public and those battling with addictions instead of supporting illegal drug dealers. Thank you.
The honourable member from St. John Rothsay.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of many Canadians who are looking for our government's continued commitment to our coastal communities and their families by standing with the Canadian aquaculture industry. Through investment and innovation in technologies and practices, Canada's highly regulated aquaculture industry can continue to grow and prosper. Our coastal communities on the East Coast and on the coast of British Columbia ask that we are given the chance to continue to thrive with a modern salmon aquaculture industry. 100% of the remaining salmon farms in coastal British Columbia operate with the support of coastal First Nations in whose traditional territories they exist. The activists have an ill-informed agenda that ignores the science. As we look to long-term renewal of BC salmon farming licenses, there's a question of growth and hope versus poverty for many Indigenous communities. The future of Canada's coastal communities depends on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, questions orales, l'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The headlines in Quebec again today show that after 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing, which has doubled in his 9 years tenure. It's a disaster about to happen. Organizations are calling for help. There are renters who are contemplating suicide, soon to be forced to live in their van. These are the headlines. After 9 years, why should Quebecers believe the Prime Minister now? The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, I understand this situation is difficult for renters and people who don't have housing. And that's why the government, after discussion and negotiation, has entered into a deal with Quebec to build affordable housing. With federal officials, 8,000 to 10,000 affordable housing units will be built. The leader of the Conservative Party is opposed. That's not okay. We need to work with our Quebec counterparts to build affordable housing. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. More expensive promises. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost after 9 years. What's worse, the Bloc voted in favor of $500 billion in inflationary centralizing spendings. That's going to cause interest rates to shoot up. Quebecers will lose their homes, and taxpayers will have to pay even more now on debt service than on health care. When will the Prime Minister recognize that he and the Bloc are not worth the cost? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to build more housing more quickly, but the Conservatives voted against it. We have a plan for a green industrial transition, but the Conservatives voted against it. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share some big news that Canadians got last week, and that is that our credit rating, our AAA credit rating, the highest possible credit rating, Canada still has that because of our budget policy. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder. It has now been 10 days and 60 dead British Columbians since the government of that province has asked the Prime Minister to reverse his deadly and radical legalization of crack, heroin, and other hard drugs in children's parks, hospitals, on transit. Why will he not reverse his radical agenda?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Addictions and Health.
Mr. Speaker, communities in BC are facing an extremely serious challenge. It is a toxic drug supply on the streets, and people are dying. We know that public consumption is an issue of concern, which is exactly why, Mr. Speaker, BC is amending their proposal, and we have been working with them every step of the way. We're treating this with the urgency it deserves, and all partners are at the table right now, Mr. Speaker, to find the path forward, working with law enforcement and health services so that we get this right and save lives, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, to find a path forward, the path forward is obvious. Ban hard drugs, invest in treatment, bring our loved ones home drug-free. Now, that minister claimed last week that she was waiting for the BC government to provide information before she could decide on reversing radical legalization. It turns out the government had given her that information within hours of the request. She has all the information, so why are her and her radical boss clinging on to this insane policy?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and
Mr.
Addictions.
Speaker, on this side of the House, we follow science, we follow healthcare experts, and we follow the information. We are working with BC on a comprehensive amendment to their proposal. This takes collaborative work, Mr. Speaker, to get it right. This is a health issue, Mr. Speaker, not a criminal one. The Leader of the Opposition is misleading Canadians in not recognizing that people need health care. They do not need to be re-stigmatized and criminalized.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Abbotsford Soccer Association wrote a letter entitled "A Cry for Change." Volunteers with the organization have found dirty needles that can puncture innocent children in the playing field. Other BC fields have had women raped and overdose, have found addicts naked, have had pets actually overdose because there's so much drug contamination on the site. What are they thinking over there?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
How did they think of that?
Mr. Speaker,
Good. Let's find out.
a pilot project was put in place at BC's request. BC now has serious concerns about some aspects of that. We share those concerns and we are addressing them. But I do want to say, Mr. Speaker, I do not think there is a family in Canada that is untouched by the tragedy of opioids. And I think that it is absolutely abhorrent to try to score political points off the pain of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, the creative people working at Radio-Canada are worried. The cultural community is worried. The Quebec government's talking about a catastrophic scenario. In short, the plan to bring CBC and Radio-Canada closer together is disturbing and looks more like a plan to save CBC at the expense of Radio-Canada. And no wonder. The CBC's Liberal-appointed CEO has had no qualms about going after Radio-Canada. Internally, they say everything's on the table, including programming and management. Will the Prime Minister commit to maintaining Radio-Canada's independence from the CBC? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, I'll repeat what I said last week. In no way will services to Francophones in Canada, whether it's in Quebec or outside Quebec, in no way will those be affected by internal restructuring at CBC Radio-Canada. What upsets me is hearing the Bloc, and it's basically the same position the Conservatives took, that CBC and Radio-Canada should be completely separate and funded separately. I don't understand where they're going with that. It makes no sense. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. There's what's said publicly and then there's anonymous information. What La Presse tells us is that nothing has been ruled out with this so-called rapprochement, including programming, and there's indeed talk of a management merger. That means a single management team for the French and English networks. In Canada, when you mix English with French, you always get English because French takes the back seat. Will the Prime Minister put a stop to this very dangerous idea of bringing the CBC and Radio-Canada closer together? The Honourable Minister of Heritage. Mr. Speaker, I would point out that the Conservatives are applauding when the Bloc talks. And when the Bloc talks about separating CBC from Radio-Canada, what's going on with the Bloc that they're so aligned with the Conservatives over something as important and fundamental as our public broadcaster? They were never able to protect the public broadcaster from the Conservatives when they were in power. And here we are saying that the Francophone programming and content will be protected. We don't want to cut the funding to the CBC or Radio-Canada.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals delay in protecting women's rights, and the Conservatives straight up want to attack women's rights. Last year, they brought in a motion attacking a woman's right to choose. Right now, they are blocking free birth control for women. And later on this week, they're going to go and attend an anti-choice rally. New Democrats want more freedom, more choices, and more affordability for women. So will the government support us in stopping the Conservatives from denying 9 million Canadians free birth control?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Let me state it clearly and unequivocally. Every woman in this country, every part of this country, must have access to the oral contraceptives that she needs to have control over her reproductive future. Any party that stands in the way of that is standing in the way of basic freedom for women in this country to have freedom and autonomy over their body. I will say to the Conservative Party of Canada, stop blocking this so that women can get the reproductive aids they need to have control over their reproductive futures.
L'honorable député de Burnaby Sud.
The honourable member for Burnaby South. Mr. Speaker, free contraceptives will save women hundreds of dollars and give them more freedom to choose. But the Conservatives want to block that. They want women to pay more and have less freedom. But New Democrats won't allow it. Will the government vote with us today to ensure that 9 million people have access to free contraceptives? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a question of freedom for women all across this country. The freedom to have access to medication that women need for their bodies. And I wonder why the Conservatives are blocking this bill, which will provide medications not just for women, but also for diabetics. It's time for action, Mr. Speaker. It's time to ensure that there are true freedoms for women all across the country. This is time to stop blocking this.
From Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, it doesn't feel like Canada anymore. Life is more unaffordable than ever. Canadians, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, even random Liberals are saying this government is not helpful. They're out of control spending and not worth the cost. Canadians are living in their cars and in tents because they can't afford housing. They're lining up at food banks in record numbers because they can't afford food and leaving in droves because they can't afford the high cost of living. When will the Liberals implement a common sense plan and bring in a dollar for dollar law, cap government spending so inflation and interest rates can come down?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have put forward a budget that invests in the things Canadians need, first and foremost housing. And we're doing that by asking those at the very top to contribute a little bit more. And the good news, Mr. Speaker, is we are doing it in a fiscally responsible way. And you don't have to believe the partisans in any chair in this House. Talk to the analysts at Moody's, who last week reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating, the highest that exists, with a stable outlook. Doesn't get better than that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
Speaker, common sense is chasing this finance minister. Just like in Alberta, she's speeding away from it. They've put taxpayers on the hook. $54 billion of taxpayer money is going to go to, just in interest to this Prime Minister's doubling of the debt. That means more money is going to bankers, bondholders, and this finance minister's Bay Street buddies than to doctors, nurses, and to the healthcare system. Why doesn't she pump on the brakes on the hypocrisy and let common sense catch up? Introduce a dollar for dollar law so inflation and interest rates can finally come down.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, last week, Moody's reaffirmed our AAA credit rating. These are objective analysts who have pointed out that Canada has the the most fiscally responsible plan in the G7. But let's talk for a minute, Mr. Speaker, about hypocrisy. Conservative hypocrisy. Last week, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader wrote an op-ed asking business leaders to attack our budget. I guess that's because he doesn't have the courage to come out and say the truth, which is he stands for those at the top, not regular Canadians.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Last week, the Governor of the Bank of Canada confirmed what millions of Canadians already know. Liberal spending is making life more expensive. 9 years of NDP Liberal deficits had led to a lost decade, lowering standards of living, record food bank usage, and a housing crisis. Will the government finally commit to a dollar-for-dollar rule that allow Canadians to feed their families and keep their homes?
Great job, Phil. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I respect the member for Northumberland, and he is better than actually misrepresenting the words of the Governor of the Bank of Canada. The reality is the Governor of the Bank of Canada, in testimony since the budget, has said, and I quote, "The budget does respect the fiscal guardrails that the government put in place." And I quote, that's what he said. And he said, quote, "Keeping the debt to GDP ratio on a declining track, and importantly, keeping the deficit below 1% of GDP in future years. The budget commits to those guardrails, and that is helpful."
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
I will quote the Governor directly. He said that this Liberal budget is not helpful. It's more distraction, more denial. In order to cover up their record of massive deficits, which has led to over $54 billion of interest being paid in this budget alone. We'll pay more in the GST. We'll collect more in the GST, or collect more here than in the GST in terms of interest. We will pay more in interest than we will in healthcare transfers. When will they finally get their deficits under control so that Canadians can eat and then keep their homes?
Hear, hear! The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, that is simply
You guys
not
are funny, I'll tell
true.
you that.
I encourage people to read the testimony of the Governor of the Bank of Canada and news reports about that testimony. Here is what he said, and I am quoting precisely: "Keeping the debt to GDP ratio on a declining track, and importantly, keeping deficits below 1% of GDP in future years. The budget also commits to those guardrails going forward, and that is helpful." Those are the words of the Governor. People can just take a look at the transcript, Mr. Speaker.
Then I have Deputy.
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers are struggling. Mortgage renewals are hurting them. Mortgage rates are high, due in part to the chaotic management of public finances by this Prime Minister and the Bloc. Over the past 9 years, more than $500 billion in additional spending has been voted in by the Liberals and supported by the Bloc. That includes $115 billion in June 2022 for pipelines. And yes, the so-called Green Bloc voted for a pipeline. Will the Liberals and the Bloc take responsibility for the high cost of mortgages and of living? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians hear one party that has no ambition, no vision, and no plan. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have a choice to make. They have a choice to listen to a party that has no vision, or a government that's investing in youth, in growth, in housing, in science, and in research. Mr. Speaker, here on this side of the House, we will continue to invest in Canadians, because countries that have confidence invest in their people, and that's precisely what we'll do. The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party has a lot of vision and common sense, unlike the government opposite, which seems to have lost sight of that. The Bloc is doing no better than the Liberals. The Bloc supported $500 billion in extra spending. They've always voted against the budget, but they do vote for all of the budgetary appropriations. And that's why Quebecers and Canadians are struggling. Will the government ask the Bloc why they're always supporting them in their nonsensical programs? Mr. Speaker, Canadians watching understand that that's not common sense. It's nonsense in 2024 to have no ambition for the country, no vision, no plan for the country at a time when we're in a full economic transition. People watching at home understand we're investing in science and research. We're investing in the next generation. We're investing in growth. It's the time for that. That's what we're doing. It's time to invest. We're a confident nation, and we will build the Canada of tomorrow together. The honourable member for Jonquière. Let's come back to immigration. On February 12th, the House supported a motion giving the government 100 days to convene a First Minister's meeting on immigration capacity. 100 days to table a plan to revise federal immigration targets as early as 2024. 100 days to table a report on the gap between federal targets and settlement capacity. Then 100 days to determine how to close this gap financially to ensure the successful settlement or integration of newcomers. There's 2 weeks to go. Have the premiers been invited to this meeting? Is the invitation in the mail? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member should know, I met with my colleagues, ministers, on Thursday. I'm looking forward to what comes out of that meeting this Thursday, and they will explain what their settlement capacity is. So I'm looking forward to what follows. The honourable member for Jonquière. Thank you. As early as November, this House voted unanimously, calling on the federal government to review its immigration targets as early as 2024, after consultation with Quebec and the provinces based on their settlement capacity. Even the Liberals recognize that the targets should reflect needs in housing, health, education, franchisation, and infrastructure. Yet Ottawa continues to increase immigration in 2024 and again in 2025. When will the government listen to the reasonable demands of this House and stop blindly increasing immigration levels? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. I believe I answered the previous question. It's the same question, essentially, so the question's been asked and answered. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Wow, that's going to get us really far. The federal government is blindly increasing its levels despite the House's request to adjust levels to suit settlement capacity, despite the House's request to start this process within 100 days with a meeting of First Ministers, despite the unfavorable opinion of the public service, warnings of economists, and despite CMHC figures showing that the housing crisis is getting worse. They want to know nothing about that. Why do the Liberals refuse at all costs to know how many people we can realistically accommodate without shortchanging them in terms of services or their basic needs? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. As I just said, Mr. Speaker, and I don't know if the member changed his sheet of paper for all three of those questions. They all sounded the same to me. I will be meeting with my provincial counterparts this Thursday to discuss our cooperation. We'll see what comes of that. But we are going to look at our levels. We haven't said which direction they'll move in. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, isn't worth the cost Quebecers pay for their mortgages, rent, food, gas, and taxes. Every day we hear moving stories of Quebecers who have to live in their cars or go without food, or of food banks that can no longer supply to meet the demand of their customers. All of this because of the Prime Minister's $500 billion in inflationary spending supported by the Bloc. When will the Prime Minister stop spending so people can finally start eating again despite the Bloc? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers need investment in healthcare, and we're doing that. Quebecers need investment in childcare, and we've done that too. Quebecers need investment in housing. We're doing that. The only thing the Conservatives understand is cut, 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 and austerity, because they're afraid of raising taxes on the wealthy. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Quebecers are already experiencing austerity imposed by this government. They can't afford rent. They can't afford groceries. That's the reality Quebecers are dealing with every day. After 9 years, this Prime Minister has found a dance partner to spend and create even more inflation at the expense of families. He knows the Bloc won't vote against them because the Bloc loves this Liberal government. The Bloc House Leader himself told TVA, we're not going to scrutinize everything the government spent. What good is the Bloc if it votes for $500 billion in Liberal inflationary spending? When will the Bloc-backed Prime Minister stop impoverishing Quebecers? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of reality, the Conservative leader, when he was minister responsible for housing, he got 6 housing units, affordable units built, whereas we're getting 8,000 built. So the Conservatives have insulted Quebec municipalities, calling them incompetent. So 6 versus 8,000. Who is the more incompetent here, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, it's already been a few weeks now that there's been a grievance at the University of Quebec. The status of the university has changed. The question is, does the member for Quebec City, did the member request that advantage, or did he simply accept the University of Laval's offer? It's a queer question. Could we get a clear answer, please? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, I thought better of the member than that. He knows that Canada has among the strictest rules in the world when it comes to conflict of interest and ethics. This minister has been exemplary when it comes to strict adherence to conflict of interest and ethical rules. So I'm very surprised to hear that question coming from that member.
The Honourable Member from Vancouver East.
Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and other advocates have called on the Liberals to end Canada's rights-violating immigration detention system. This system traumatizes people seeking safety. Provinces have ended immigration detention in their jurisdictions. Instead of following their lead, this federal government plans to lock up migrants and asylum seekers in federal prisons. They also want to codify this practice into law. This is in violation of international human rights standards. When will this government stop jailing people seeking safety and a better life?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate our honourable colleague's question. I share her concern that the rights of all individuals must be respected. I think she will understand that there are a very small group of individuals with perhaps violent criminal pasts, those that may be involved in terrorist activity, for whom releasing in the community is not an acceptable option for public safety. We'd worked for many years with the provinces that kept this very small group of individuals in the appropriate custody, and now we're going to take our responsibility at the same time respecting their rights.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Courtenay, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, every minute, 2 garbage trucks worth of plastic are dumped into the world's oceans. Canada has the longest coastline in the world, and plastic and industrial waste are choking the shoreline, making its way into our food and harming vital ecosystems. But the Liberal solution? Cancelling the Ghost Gear Fund, which creates local jobs and removes plastic and marine debris from our waters. This government says they care about the environment, but refuses to act to protect it. Yeah. Will the Liberals immediately restore this funding so that we can continue to clean up our coasts?
Yes.
L'honorable ministre, pêche et océans.
Monsieur le Président, on sait au niveau de pêche.
Mr. Speaker, at the DFO, we know how important the state of our oceans are, and we are working very hard. Projects have been implemented for recuperating phantom objects, and work will continue, Mr. Speaker, with our communities and with those in the fields. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mississauga Malton.
Speaker, our government will always uphold the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to protect Canadians' rights. We even established a rule in 2019 that every government bill must be accompanied by a charter statement to ensure that Canadians' rights are respected in all legislation. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition admitted that he would overrule Canadians' rights using the notwithstanding clause. Can the Minister of Justice please reaffirm our government's commitment to upholding the Charter?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Canada.
I thank the member for the question. I will state that our government will stop at nothing to ensure that Canadians' charter-guaranteed rights and freedoms are protected. You cannot claim to care about freedom and then vow to strip certain people's freedoms away when it is politically inconvenient. That is not democracy, Mr. Speaker. The opposition has said they'll start with criminal justice matters, but where will they stop? Religious rights, abortion rights, the rights of the LGBTQ2 community? Our government will always protect all Canadians' rights. It's a wake-up call that the Leader of the Opposition cannot and will not do the same.
The Honourable Member from Montmagny-Lillec-Kamouraska-Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, the crises are getting worse and worse and worse. Housing, cost of living, and now the opioid crisis. The situation in Montreal is getting worse and worse. Crack and heroin can be found close to schools, and people are afraid for their parents and their families. Who has helped the Liberals in this policy? The Bloc Québécois. They are simply not worth the cost, Mr. Speaker. My question is simple. When will the Prime Minister put an end to this radical, hard drug legalization process? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House. The member knows full well that there have been no such requests from Quebec, and so there will be no change considered in treating opioids in Quebec. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the Bloc continues to support this Prime Minister's full spending spree. The Bloc wants more transfers to the provinces, but then votes in favour of $500 billion in centralising and inflationary credits. We just don't get it on this side. Without housing, Quebecers are becoming homeless, which is having a major impact on the healthcare system. The Bloc and the Prime Minister are simply not worth the cost. When will this Bloc-backed Prime Minister stop wasting money so that Quebecers can be housed with dignity? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would perhaps be a good idea for the Conservatives to talk to the Quebec provincial government, the mayors of Quebec's municipalities. This because we have an agreement with Quebec that seeks to invest in housing. The province of Quebec and the federal government know how important it is to invest in housing, to invest in order to help support Quebecers. But these Conservatives simply only understand austerity. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years under this government, it is clear that the Bloc and the Prime Minister are simply not worth the cost. The housing shortage and high rents have forced a 42-year-old woman to live in her minivan, and she won't be the only one. While Quebecers are simply trying to survive, the Bloc has chosen to vote for $500 billion in Liberal budget allocations. This means they voted for bureaucracy, red tape and waste, like the $60 million Arrive scam program. When will the Bloc-supported Prime Minister stop wasting money so that Quebecers can start living with dignity again? The Honourable Minister for Housing. Mr. Speaker, if the member thinks there's a problem in housing in Quebec, then why did he vote against housing projects in Quebec? 6, that's the number of total affordable housing units were built when the current leader of the Conservatives was Housing Minister. We are continuing to invest in affordable housing throughout Canada and in Quebec. We are investing in affordable housing, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this government, the housing crisis has become so serious that Quebecers are having trouble choosing between housing and food. The Journal de Montréal let us know that a 42-year-old woman is living in her minivan while the government continues to spend. And yet the Bloc, which claims to defend the interests of Quebecers, is making the situation worse by voting with the Liberals for $500 billion in budget appropriations. So it costs a lot to vote Bloc. Mr. Speaker, when will the Bloc-supported Liberals stop their out-of-control spending? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to be able to speak to housing with my colleague from Le Fjord. In his riding alone, 180 affordable housing units were built. It's a great result. The only issue is that perhaps he could talk about with his leader so that he can figure out why only 6 affordable housing units were built during his entire mandate. Great news for his riding, but the comparison is not the same. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, the initial report of the Haut Commission unequivocally reveals the extent of foreign interference in our elections. The government will today table a bill containing measures to counter this interference. Better late than never, but if the government wants to show that it is really serious, it must finally create a register of foreign agents, as everyone has been asking it to do. The Bloc Québécois intends to table a bill to create a binding registry. But there's nothing to stop the federal government from going ahead today. Will the minister commit to legislating to create a binding registry of foreign agents? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, of course, we appreciate our colleague's enthusiasm. He has a certain experience here in Parliament. He wouldn't want me to talk about a bill before it is actually tabled in this House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, I may be censured by yourself because it would be a violation of parliamentary privilege to do so, and I would never want to do that in my life. So I would like to ask my colleague to be patient, and I have full trust that we'll be able to work with him on these important issues in the future. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, the Haut Commission report also reveals the irresponsible attitude of the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party of Canada when faced with China's interference. The report confirms that as early as 2019, the Prime Minister was duly informed of irregularities in the candidate nomination in Don Valley North. The report even specifies on page 137 the reasons given by the Prime Minister for not withdrawing his candidate from the election. These reasons include, and I quote, given that the Liberal Party expected to win Don Valley North. In other words, the Prime Minister doesn't care about interference at all if, in the end, the Liberal Party wins. Should democracy take precedence over partisanship? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately I disagree with the last few words of my colleague's question. We are the full government that implemented measures to counter foreign interference. We have since improved them, following recommendations made by experts. We have adjusted them, fine-tuned them, to strengthen them. We have worked with our friends in the Bloc and other parties in order to allow the Haut Commission to do its work. We are looking forward to the recommendations. And for sure, Parliament will have to work together in order to work with these recommendations.
Member from Mission, Mascree, Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, drugs and disorder. Since the request 10 days ago to end deadly legalization, 60 British Columbians have died and the impacts are felt in every community. The Abbotsford Soccer Association has to sweep their fields for dirty needles and deal with open drug use at our community parks. Patrons of the SkyTrain in Surrey Centre fear open use of meth on our transit system. Can the minister provide the date when they will finally cancel this wacko policy?
Here, here, here. Now ask the Honourable Member from Timmins, James Bay, to please keep his voice quiet unless he's recognized by the Speaker to speak. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, the pilot program in BC was set forth at BC's request to save lives. They have come to us now to amend their proposal, and working with the BC government, law enforcement, healthcare services to get this right to save lives of people who are dying because of a toxic drug supply is an urgent priority for us, Mr. Speaker.
Again, I'm going to ask all members, please, to hold their comments until they're recognized by the chair. The Honourable Member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, drugs or disorder. It was 10 days ago that the BC government pleaded with this Prime Minister to end this wacko drug policy. There have been 60 overdose deaths since BC begged for this to come to an end. On what day will they finally act and give BC what they're asking for?
Again, I'm going to ask the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby, please, not to take the floor until he's recognized from doing so. And I know that this is a very difficult issue for many, and so I ask members, please, to listen carefully to the questions and listen carefully to the answers. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have a very effective collaborative relationship with the province of British Columbia, and it is frankly insulting to the province to suggest that the province needs to beg us for anything. The province has serious concerns about their pilot project. We share their concerns, and we are working collaboratively and effectively to address those concerns. What we're not doing is playing partisan politics with the lives of real people.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the crime, chaos, drugs and disorder. The BC government sent the Prime Minister all the information he needs to end his wacko drug policy experiment. In his 10 days of inaction, it's estimated 60 British Columbians' lives have been tragically lost to overdoses. Wacko drug policies have the RCMP citing government-supplied drugs being diverted, and open drug use of crack in hospital rooms, meth in restaurants, fentanyl in parks and playgrounds. Wow. How many more days will it take this Prime Minister to end his failed drug policy experiment?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and of course, all members in this House are absolutely ripped apart by what we're seeing the opioid crisis do across this country. The responsibility that we have to the families who've lost loved ones, to the people who are in crisis right now, is to make sure that we follow evidence. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that the ideas proposed by the Conservatives have been tried and failed everywhere they've been tried. And that if we're going to have honest conversations, holding out false solutions is very disappointing on a subject so sensitive. We need to work collaboratively in an evidence-based way to make sure that we do everything we can to get this right, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, over 1.9 million seniors 65 and over have successfully applied for Canadian Dental Care Plan. Conservative chose to vote against funding toward the CDCP. However, the numbers speak for itself and have demonstrated Canadians' overwhelming support for this program. Can the Minister please update the House on the impacts of the work being done to provide access to dental care for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by thanking the member for Richmond Hill for all of his work to promote.
The Chair has been pretty patient with the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, on calling out when he doesn't have the chair. I'm going to ask him, please, to listen respectfully to the questions that are asked and to the answers that are given. The Honourable Minister from Health can start from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to start by thanking the member for Richmond Hill, who has been such an incredible advocate to making sure all Canadians get the oral health care they deserve. And I want to say that in the first 3 days, we've had just extraordinary results, Mr. Speaker. 15,000 seniors have already, in fact, more than 15,000 seniors just in the first 3 days have already gotten service. And when you think about that, Mr. Speaker, it's a fundamental issue of dignity and prevention. Those are seniors who aren't going to wind up in a hospital room. Mr. Speaker, we need to continue that momentum. More than 8,000 dentists have now signed up, with more and more signing up every day. We're going to get
The Honourable Member from Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, on April 11th, the Prime Minister said that it wasn't simply an overall the election was free and fair, but that in every single constituency election integrity held and it was free and fair. Justice Hogue concluded otherwise. She concluded that well-grounded suspicions about PRC interference in Don Valley North could, quote, could have impacted who was elected to Parliament. This is significant, end quote. Does the government agree with Justice Hogue that PRC interference could have impacted who was elected to Parliament in Don Valley North?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we agree with Justice Hogue that there has been an increase in foreign state actors, hostile state actors, seeking to interfere in the Canadian democratic process. Obviously, that takes place at the riding level. We also noted Justice Hogue saying that this is the case for a very small number of constituencies, and she is not able to draw definitive conclusions as to the extent of that impact. So I understand my honourable friend is identifying some of what Justice Hogue said. I think it's important to put it in the context that she herself did.
The Honourable Member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell the government what Justice Hogue concluded in Steveston, Richmond East. She found that, quote, there are strong indications of PRC involvement, and there is a reasonable possibility that these narratives could have impacted the result in this riding. Again, the Prime Minister said just several weeks ago that every single constituency election integrity held, and it was free and fair. Does the government agree with Justice Hogue that PRC interference could have impacted the election result in Steveston, Richmond East?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we think that Justice Hogue has done a very serious job in terms of understanding the extent and nature of foreign interference and helping Canadians understand also the tactics that foreign hostile state actors may use and how they seek to undermine the confidence of Canadians in democracy. So I think we should be very careful, Mr. Speaker, before we take out of context specific things that Justice Hogue has said. Our government, unlike the government that was in office before 2015, has taken this matter seriously and will continue to do everything necessary, Mr. Speaker, in this regard.
The Honourable Member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The Liberal Employment Minister got caught cashing checks from his secret lobbying business. Turns out his own department got lobbied and then gave $10 million out, and the minister himself announced it. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, it's clear they're not worth the cost or that corruption. How much did the minister pocket, and is the government prepared today to announce that they're going to have the RCMP investigate this latest Liberal scandal?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
The minister has, of course, addressed that matter, Mr. Speaker, but let's talk about the member for Leeds-Grenville, who in this House, in an alarming way last week, failed to rule out using the notwithstanding clause to deny the right of women to reproductive services in this country. There are 80 members of that caucus who have green or yellow lights from the Campaign Life Coalition.
That's right.
Who is going to be standing up over there to make sure that the rights of women are protected against these conservatives' anti-choicers?
The Honourable Member from St. John's East.
The pollution that is fueling costly climate change while building a strong, sustainable Canadian economy that creates jobs and invests in competitive, decarbonizing world is the key to success in the 21st century. The latest National Inventory Report confirms Canada has bent the curve and is reducing emissions toward achieving the country's 2030 emissions reduction goal. Can the Minister of Environment and Climate Change update Canadians on this progress and the next steps in climate action?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her question. In fact, the emissions are down in Canada. And it's not only according to us, but the independent Canadian Climate Institute says that for the first time in the history of Canada, we're on track to meet our 2026 and 2030 targets, Mr. Speaker. 44 million tons tons less pollution in 2022 than in 2019. That's the equivalent of removing from our roads in Canada 13 million vehicles, which is basically half of our existing vehicles in Canada. More needs to be done, which is why we're the first and only country in the G20 to have eliminated fossil fuel subsidies and the only large oil and gas producer to put in place a cap on emissions, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, the expected military invasion in Rafah will be catastrophic. Over 1 million people, half of them children, have no safe place to go. In Gaza, there's famine in the north and bombing in the south. This escalation threatens the safety of both Israelis and Palestinians. The Liberals should be doing everything to protect innocent civilians, and this includes the hostages. Where are the promised sanctions on extremist settlers? Where are the two-way arms embargo? Why won't the minister do what she promised and act to save lives?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The violence must stop. What is happening in Gaza is catastrophic. As we have said from the beginning, a military operation in Rafah would be devastating for the Palestinian civilians and foreign nationals. They are seeking refuge. They are mothers and children. They have nowhere else to go, and asking them to move again is unacceptable. We continue to call for a sustainable ceasefire. This cannot be one-sided. Hamas must release all hostages and lay down its weapons, and humanitarian aid must get into Gaza. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Unfortunately, and contrary to what the Minister of Environment just said, Canada is not on track to meet our target for 2030, which is expressed to the United Nations as 40 to 45% below 2005 levels, only conveniently forgetting the range to 45%. And on top of that, we're still spending more money to support fossil fuels than to decarbonize. $34 billion on Trans Mountain, another $5.7 billion on fraud, carbon capture and storage, as well as underspending when they promise they're going to spend money on climate. We are at least $14 billion behind that promise.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, if you won't take it from me, maybe the member will take it from organizations which you probably know very well. Environmental Defence said, and I quote, "New data released today by the Government of Canada shows that we're finally starting to bend the curve when it comes to climate pollution. GHG emissions in 2022 were the lowest they've been in 25 years, Mr. Speaker, with the exception of the pandemic years. The Pembina Institute said Canada's climate policies are starting to pay off. It appears the suite of measures introduced by the Government of Canada over the last years is starting to make a notable dent in our overall emissions." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As we bring to the end of question period, again, I want to encourage all members.
All right, gang, that kind of brings us to the end of question period. But here's the thing. We have a number of fun videos, a couple I made today, that I want to show you. Please check these out like in their original form, but they're pretty fun. Pretty fun day in the House of Parliament as well. Like, it seems to go smoother when Trudeau's not there. Maybe that'll be the way it is for the whole nation. When he's not there anymore, it will go smoother. We've got these videos. We're going to watch them.
We need to get rid of all of the money that we're wasting on NDP, Liberal activists, on corrupt pharmaceutical companies that are profiting off of this death and misery, and put all of those resources into treatment and recovery. We also need to sue the pharmaceutical companies rather than giving them more tax dollars.
It's a crazy time in Canada, right? As we learn about these Canadian federal politics right here on Question Period Canada. My name's Ehren. Let's get into this crazy video, man. It doesn't slow down in Canadian federal politics. Let's take a peek.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Good to be with you.
Do you have any confidence the changes that BC has asked for will make decriminalization better, or is the only solution here just to get out of this pilot entirely?
The only solution is to completely reverse the Trudeau NDP radical experiment of legalizing drugs and letting people smoke meth in hospital rooms and blow the smoke in the face of nurses, of letting addicts shoot up heroin next to children in parks. From the very beginning, this was a radical, senseless Trudeau NDP experiment that was doomed for death and destruction, and sadly, the data shows that that's exactly what it has caused.
One of the issues too is there is very little data on how this was even working, but the examples you mentioned, drug supply, that's not impacted by decrim. Smoke in the face of nurses will likely change because of these changes. Do you believe that someone should be able to possess small amounts of hard drugs in their home and feel that they can call and ask for help without knowing that they may get arrested for doing so?
Should people feel like they can call and ask for help without getting arrested? Of course. That's not what this does. That has always been possible before decriminalization, and it's possible all over North America to call and ask for help, but only in one place in all of North America is it legal to use crack, heroin, meth on SkyTrains, in parks where children play, in hospitals where nurses now can't breastfeed their kids because they've inhaled meth fumes. Only in the wild and radical experiment of Trudeau and the NDP has this been possible, and the results are a nightmare.
The amendments would change those examples you mentioned, though. One of the things BC is attempting to do is put in treatment beds, but they've failed largely. They can't get enough nurses, they can't get enough facilities. What would you do differently to support provinces around treatment, and how would you ensure that the resources are there to do it properly?
The problem is that Trudeau and the NDP are spending all the money on radical activists and greedy, corrupt pharmaceutical companies, all of whom have profited off of this nightmare. And I would cut all of that. I'd stop funding the radical activists, bureaucrats, and pharmaceutical companies who are making a fortune and perpetuating their own industry. And I would put that money into real treatment and recovery so that we can detox, counsel, give group therapy, physical exercise, and bring our loved ones home drug-free.
Well, who are the radicals that you're describing?
All of the people that they're being funded by the NDP and Liberals to give out hard heroin-grade opioids, and who have been advocating for this and profiting from this radical policy that no other place in all of North America is doing. So we need to cut off those radicals and fire the people, the NDP Liberal activists in the public health bureaucracy who have helped cause this mayhem and enabled Trudeau and Eby to bring in a policy that has killed 2,500 people in 1 year alone.
So in that vein, a radical would be Dr. Bonnie Henry. She has advocated to have a safer supply of drugs, to make this available for drug users.
I have to correct you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You seem to be repeating NDP Liberal talking points.
Well, I don't think they mentioned Bonnie Henry here, do they?
They do use the dishonest and inaccurate term and fully discredited term, safe supply, if I could,
I appreciate this.
To describe unsafe heroin-grade drugs that everyone now admits, what they used to deny, are ending up in the hands of kids. That is not, whatever Justin Trudeau and the NDP say, that is not safe.
So you're correct on that. And we have seen a surge in diversion, and Global BC has done a huge series of stories on diversion.
I will give you credit, because Global has done some very good journalism on this.
So let's talk about regulated supply then. Let's use that term, because that's how the province wants to describe it. I know drugs aren't safe in most situations. So let's talk about regulated supply. Dr. Bonnie Henry has called for it. The chief coroner in BC, Lisa Lapointe, she just left her job, but she had called for it as well. What do you know that they don't know around the impacts around this regulated drug market? Do you know better than they do when it comes to this policy?
I know what everybody knows. The result. The results are clear. The results are in. And it's been an absolute deadly disaster that has killed 2,500 people, for which Trudeau and the NDP and all of the activists and bureaucrats that work for them are to blame. We need to cut off the corrupt pharmaceutical companies, the Liberal NDP bureaucrats and activists, and put all of the resources into treatment and recovery to bring our loved ones home drug-free.
Are you worried about finding the nurses, the space? Our healthcare system everywhere is already taxed.
True.
Like how challenging will that be to find that part of the healthcare system, the support it needs?
Oh, it'll definitely be a challenge, and that's why we need to get rid of all of the money that we're wasting on NDP Liberal activists, on corrupt pharmaceutical companies that are profiting off of this death and misery, and put all of those resources into treatment and recovery. We also need to sue the pharmaceutical companies rather than giving them more tax dollars, to hold them accountable and collect millions and hopefully billions of dollars in liabilities from them for having caused this in the first place. The Americans have collected $54 billion from Big Pharma because of the opioid crisis. In Canada, the NDP and Trudeau, they don't collect money from pharma. They're giving them more money to profit them by buying even more of the heroin-grade opioids and give them out in our streets. That is radical, and it is deadly.
We've also seen an increase in crime linked to all of this. The stories are well told. The last time we had a conversation, you brought up the example of an individual who has been arrested again and again and again. Yeah. We just saw a case recently in British Columbia. We don't know if it's drug related, but somebody who stole a car, violent carjacking, got put behind bars, got released the next day, did the same thing again. The bail reforms that Ottawa has brought in are clearly not working here. Would you bring in the notwithstanding clause to use your powers if Prime Minister to change those bail conditions to stop this catch and release system that's currently in place?
I don't have to, because the catch and release system was not brought in by the courts. It was brought in by Justin Trudeau and the NDP through Bill C-75, and it was not required. No court has ever required they create a catch and release bail system. Now, my common sense plan is to make repeat violent offenders who are newly arrested on a serious crime ineligible for bail. It will be jail, not bail, jail, not bail.
Is there any point that you would use the notwithstanding clause to address the challenges within our current legal system and the way the courts are designed?
I think we have to be careful not to blame the judges for decisions that Justin Trudeau and the NDP have made. Trudeau willingly passed Bill C-75, catch and release bail. He willingly passed C-5, house arrest for career car thieves and sex offenders. He willingly passed Bill C-83, which allows Paul Bernardo to go into a medium security penitentiary where he enjoys hockey rinks and tennis courts. Those are decisions he made. Nobody forced him to make it. And the NDP was there to drive the getaway car every single time.
You know full well decrim has been a massive issue in BC. It is influencing the way that voters are thinking as we head to an election in the fall. You're also aware that we have two parties very much opposed to it like you are, BC United and the Conservatives. Do you have any intention to get involved in provincial politics? Considering right now, if you look at polls, there's going to be vote splitting that will open the door for David Eby to get re-elected. Do you have any plan to tell Conservatives in British Columbia which of those two parties you prefer?
I don't. I think that the people of BC should reject the radical and costly carbon tax, catch and release, and legalization of drugs that both the BC NDP and Justin Trudeau are imposing, and elect a common sense government to replace both of them in BC and here in Ottawa.
You talked about costly. Pipeline politics is big in BC as well. The Trans Mountain Pipeline just started moving things yesterday. Huge delays largely caused by the BC government.
Yeah.
If you were Prime Minister, what would you do around energy projects? Would you go back to the table to some of those projects that the Prime Minister rejected when it comes to moving oil out of Alberta?
Well, you can't. So you need companies to do that. So I can't force a company to come back and put aside billions of dollars when they've already been ripped off by the government. But what I will do is repeal Trudeau's unconstitutional anti-resource law, Bill C-69, so that we can stop sending dollars to dictators abroad and instead bring paychecks for our people at home. So I will approve pipelines, mines, forestry, nuclear, hydroelectric dams, so that we can unleash production of our resources instead of the NDP Liberal policy, which is to encourage more pollution around the world by buying the resources from dirty dictators abroad.
Alex Jones, well-known commentator in the States, has said that he would like to see you as Prime Minister. He endorses you. He's also someone who peddled conspiracy theories around the murder of children at Sandy Hook Elementary. Do you accept his endorsement, the idea that he would like for you to be the Prime Minister?
No. And I don't listen to his, I don't listen to him. The only person that talks about and promotes him is Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau has really gotten into promoting a lot of conspiracy theories. And he is, I think, Canada's top conspiracy theorist. This is from a guy who dressed up in racist costumes so many times he can't remember them all, who is now causing death and destruction by legalizing crack, heroin, and cocaine in BC, who lets out repeat violent offenders, says he admires the basic Chinese communist dictatorship, has doubled our national debt, doubled housing costs, now wants to force a 61 cent a litre carbon tax on Canadians. That's the kind of radical extremism that we have in our Prime Minister, and he is the one that should reject his and repent for his radicalism, so that we can bring home a common sense government that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
So yes, come and join the gang. I'm Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. We do wonder about a lot of things here. We have a fun community where we watch the live with some audio. I'm going to cut myself off there and go into this last piece. This is Lila Goodridge. Most people don't know who that is, but this video is effective. We're going to check it out. Like, I was pretty surprised when I saw this today coming out of her group of people, but you'll hear it, I'm pretty sure. Everyone has an opinion about
First,
Canadian
we
federal
will end
politics.
the Liberal-funded Safe Supply Program, which is effectively government-funded drug trafficking. Next, we will bring hope to those battling addiction with a common sense plan for treatment and recovery that includes evidence-based medication that saves the lives of people with addiction.
It's a crazy time in Canada, right? As we learn about these Canadian federal politics right here on Question Period Canada. My name's Ehren. Let's get into this crazy video, man. It doesn't slow down in Canadian federal politics. Let's take a peek.
Talk about the addiction crisis. In 1996, Purdue Pharma was licensed to start selling OxyContin in Canada.
Some patients may be afraid of taking opioids because they're perceived as too strong or addictive, but that is far from actual fact. Less than 1% of patients taking opioids actually become addicted.
They were mismarketing it, and they continue to do so anyway because it really was all about profit.
The outcry over drug companies pushing painkillers has become too loud to ignore.
Physicians were then encouraged to assess pain as the fifth vital sign and freely prescribe opiates for treatment.
Doctors are handing this out, and we were told to do so because we wanted to treat pain.
Opiates then flooded the streets. They often ended up in the hands of individuals who the drugs were not prescribed for. This phenomenon is known as diversion. In 2001, media reports started to emerge of addiction and overdoses from Oxycontin. By 2012, nearly every province and territory had taken measures to curb the harm. But it was too late, and the damage was done. The door was now open to the spread of illicit drugs like fentanyl. More and more Canadians fell victim to the addiction crisis. In 2016, Canada's first so-called safe supply program started in London, Ontario.
We're investing to extend safer supply.
We now have what is referred to as Safe Supply Program in my area.
This taxpayer-funded drug experiment intended to curb the use of more dangerous drugs like fentanyl. But the irony here is that these drugs were anything but safe. Not only did they not solve the addiction crisis, they made it worse.
Initially, I was supportive of Safe Supply.
A doctor at a nearby hospital initially thought that Safe Supply might help their patients, but the opposite happened. The frequency and severity of her patients' infections rose dramatically. Not only that, but the Safe Supply hydromorphone was quickly diverted.
Health Canada seems to have almost no strategy in place to deal with opioid diversion. Diversion is a technical term for selling on the black market here.
We have no idea how much they're diverting.
Individuals would collect their hydromorphone tablets from the pharmacy and then go and sell them on the street to purchase stronger drugs like fentanyl.
I have also had patients who are in the Safe Supply program that divert their Dilaudid to buy fentanyl.
These drugs were often sold to teenagers who perceived them as safe because they were marketed that way. Once they developed an addiction, they often moved on to harder drugs like fentanyl. And this is the cruelest part about opioid addiction.
My dealer said, you know, I've got these new pills, they're fake oxys. He didn't tell me they were fentanyl because nobody knew what fentanyl was yet. He just said they're 100 times stronger and they're only $5 more. And I was just like, okay, because I was getting a pretty high tolerance at this point.
Body quickly develops a tolerance to the drug, so you need to take more and more to achieve the same effect. This often leads people to more potent drugs. Safe Supply is fueling fentanyl use. And once an individual gets into the cycle of addiction, their lives quickly spiral out of control. I saw this firsthand when I visited London last year. This failed experiment is not just happening in London, Ontario, but in every community across the country where so-called safe supply has been tried, it has failed. Crime and chaos and addiction follow. Communities in British Columbia are amongst the worst impacted. Since 2020, these safe supply programs have been flooding our streets with opiates. Last spring, a story broke about a 14-year-old girl, Camilla Sword, who died after becoming addicted to hydromorphone. The story exposes that drug dealers would purchase hydromorphone from the streets in East Hastings in downtown Vancouver and resell these drugs at a profit to teenagers living in Port Coquitlam and other little communities throughout the Lower Mainland.
Organized crime individuals literally stood outside of pharmacies and bought or collected the safe supply from those that were receiving it. Is this true?
Yes.
Camilla's friends tell Sword they buy drugs marketed as safe supply.
Camilla's friends said these drugs were consumed in large groups with kids as young as 11. Global News went into downtown Vancouver to test whether hydromorphone was that easily accessible.
We overheard drug dealers shouting dillies, a slang word for Dilaudid or hydromorphone, which is one of the drugs the government has encouraged doctors to prescribe as safe supply to those suffering from addiction.
Within a half hour, the journalist had acquired nearly 30 tablets of hydromorphone.
We're told this is hydromorphone, also known as dillies, also known as Dilaudid. A lab later confirmed the pills were in fact hydromorphone. Some were still in the package, which doctors say looks like government safe supply pills.
In Prince George, an RCMP drug bust found 10,000 pills, including hydromorphone. Courageous addiction doctors from across the country have been calling for an end of Canada's so-called safe supply experiment. They say there is accumulating evidence that safe supply programs are being widely abused. They criticize the government for failing to, and I quote, recognize the negative public health impact of safe supply programs that we are seeing in our practices and communities.
Unfortunately, these people aren't being listened to because safer supply advocates tend to bully addiction physicians into silence.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here?
Maybe there's a little grass growing right along here. Some happy little things.
I love you, you love me. We all own our own bodies, so marry who you want and do whatever drugs you choose. And when it's time, you can die with dignity by determining your own end-of-life plan.
Hi, Maria!
Hi, Officer Winkles!
How you doing today?
I don't have to answer that question.
That is correct!
I'm recording you!
Am I being detained?
Nope!
Which I can legally do because I'm in a public place!
Come back if you have a warrant!
Alrighty!
Know your rights!
Yay!
Okay, Gumshoes, Carmen Sandiego is in a country where socialism failed. That narrows it down to Venezuela, Cuba, the former Soviet Union, Moldova, Laos, Vietnam, Albania, Angola.
So we did some digging into your past.
Oh, the suspense is killing me! But we still haven't solved the case, Holmes. Why is marijuana a Schedule I drug?
Elementary, my dear Watson. Nixon and racism.
What?
You okay? I don't know. Hey man, it's alright. It's alright. We've got qualified immunity. Qualified immunity. It's not for you, it's just for me. I shot your dog.
I shot your wife.
I get to go on with my life.
My favorite part is where the character says, I do not want green eggs and ham. And then Sam I Am says, that's fine, you don't have to eat them. That's your right. The end. It's a short book.
Here we see one of the last taxicab monopolies struggling for life. Competitors have entered their ecosystem.
Do you know what eminent domain abuse is? It's when the government decides the neighborhood of make-believe is better used by a Taiwanese LCD manufacturer.
Today we have a real senator. Hello, Senator.
How are you doing?
What is your favorite color?
I would have to say blue.
Me too. Tell me, why did you sell all your stock right before the crash?
I mean, it's literally just the tragedy of the commons, but they made it cute.
And that sound means we're in international waters. I'm gonna marry a robot and sell my kidney on eBay.
My dearest Rowena, today the district attorney filed criminal charges against a two-door sedan.
Carmen Sandiego is hiding in a country that contains an American military base. Is she in Australia, Bahrain, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, the British Indian Ocean Territory, Cuba, Germany, Djibouti?
Menace.
Circle, square, rectangle, war factory.
All right, Jack, where is your gay wedding cake?
I refuse to bake a gay wedding cake, and you can't force me to. It's my right.
That is your right, but it is my right to kick you off of this show. Please leave.
Yep.
You homophobic, bearded meat goblin.
I just want enough to warm it up some. I don't want to set it on fire. It's very easy to set it on fire.
Well, today on This Old House, we're at the city zoning office because they think our new porch is 2 inches too close to the sidewalk, which is f***ing bullshit because their sidewalk is too far away from the street, which they'd know about if they'd read any of the emails I'd sent them over the past 18 months. So join us as we waste our whole f***ing day on this shit.
The premiere of Thomas the High-Speed Rail has been delayed. Again. And at the 10 Bitcoin level, you receive a handsome tote bag.
Quack! Good one!
Quiet!
Very good!
Queen!
What else starts with the letter Q?
Space lasers.
Oh.
John Podesta and Hillary Clinton had an email exchange about hot dogs.
Where do we get these puppets?
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and you have a right to defend your house with firearms. With firearms.
This Prime Minister
We're just wrapping up. That's the end of the show. Thank you all so much for watching. It's fun every afternoon here. Canadian Question Period. It's pretty fun.